Welcome to the New Books Network.
Hello, my name is Kristen Turner, and this is New Books in Music, a podcast of the New Books Network. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Judith Tick to talk about Becoming Ella Fitzgerald, the jazz singer who transformed American song, published by Norton in 2023. This expansive new biography documents Ella's importance as a music maker, the ups and downs of her career, and her place in the music industry. Singers are often sidelined in histories of jazz, and jazz critics often celebrated instrumentalists over vocalists in their commentary. Consequently, many authors have not taken Ella seriously as a musical innovator, composer, arranger, or creative performer. Judith Tick shows that Ella was all these things and more. She provides new information about Ella's family and early career and analyzes how Ella negotiated the ever-shifting lines between jazz and pop. However, Ella was also part of a vast commercial music infrastructure that sometimes curtailed her artistic decisions and marginalized her because of her race and gender. Tick teases out how Ella's power to shape her own career and musicianship changed over time. Thank you so much for being here, Judith. How are you today?
Thank you, Kristen. It's a pleasure to talk with you and to continue the many conversations we've had over the years about women, gender, and music history.
Well, I'm thrilled and excited to talk about this wonderful biography. What brought you to the subject of Ella Fitzgerald?
A subject like you arrive there in stages. I think the first stage was recognizing that I had an emotional connection to the subject just from my family background. Then the second stage was learning about African American women in general and their history in music, and then specifically focusing on jazz, because jazz had been a neglected part of my education. And when I realized that there was so little history of women as vocalists in jazz in any kind of comprehensive scholarly way, that I had a big task ahead of me. So I think in stages I got committed to this project, and one turning point was writing to her son, Ray Brown Jr., who told me how pleased Ella would be that a scholar was taking on her life and work as a subject. My mother would be very pleased, he said. That was such a green light for me. The second green light was the support I received from scholars who had worked in the field, like Tad Hirshhorn, who did a biography of her manager, and her good friend Jim Blackman, who knew Ella for the last 15 or 20 years of her life and shared so much material with me.
Um, your book starts actually with this beautiful memory of you and Ella Fitzgerald's recordings and your family. So your sort of emotional connection to her music really shines out throughout the book, not in kind of a hagiographic way, but in just this kind of deep appreciation for her artistry, which is one of the joys of reading the book.
I think the emotional, intellectual, and music historical connections were there, but it's that initial love of her voice and respect for her connection that she could make with an audience that really motivated me to stay with this project, because it was a big undertaking.
I'm sure.
Her son, Ray Brown Jr., said to me, "My mother was all about the audience." What I tried to explore that statement was to see who the audience was over and over in her life. Her first audience, and for a long time, her most powerful audience, were, were Black Americans who loved music, for whom entertainment was a way out of segregation, and who supported and really adored her work. So that was the first audience I had to encounter. And then we went on with different audiences over time until finally we have a global audience for this figure. People know her all around the world.
So the book goes through her life chronologically, but there are also some themes that sort of overlay as the whole biography, as you're sort of following different ideas that come in and out of her life and music making. And I thought, rather than trying to drill down to individual to many individual instances, I'd like to ask you some questions that sort of draw upon those larger themes and things that keep returning in the book. And so my first is just, what does make Ella so special as a singer and musician?
Two really important things. One is just the gift that she got with the kind of voice that she had, its range, its purity, its ability to tell the truth by centering so perfectly on each pitch that you heard whatever she sang with tremendous clarity. And that includes the ability to deliver perfect diction for lyrics. So the charisma of her voice is number one. And that reaches people all over the world, even when they don't understand words. After all, her audience, most of the time when she was outside of this country, did not speak English. So that's a hint to the power of her gift. I think that the second aspect of Ella was her musicianship. She was born with perfect pitch. She could impersonate instruments. She could absorb a whole instrumental vocabulary and add and create to it in her own way, so that she used her talent to explore her gift through music. She learned how to improvise in an original way. She learned how to emulate the artists she admired, both vocally and instrumentally, in her own way. So that's the second point. And the third point that really relates to her is the diversity of her taste. She wasn't limited to notions of what a jazz woman should sing. Nothing was beyond her if it could reach the audience. So she was able to use her versatility for very large causes. And in the end, she almost became, or not really almost, she was a humanitarian, a musical humanitarian. And that word came from Nat Hentoff, a very powerful jazz critic in the 60s and 70s who didn't particularly like her style of singing. So there it was. So those are the three factors that persist as themes. I think your question also touches on the nature of intersectionality between race and gender, between Jim Crow, which is our shorthand for race and segregation and racism, and Jane Crow, which is our shorthand for sex, gender, and sexism and misogyny. And those things intersected in Ella Fitzgerald's career. And you, given your work, I'm sure picked up on those feminist themes very strongly.
Yes, absolutely. So let's continue with that. One of the things um, that was brought home to me was also the amount that an individual singer, particularly before she was well, even after she was really famous, she had only a sort of, she could move around within a relatively limited space, because not just because of race and gender discrimination, but also because of the nature of the entertainment industry and the kinds of contracts that she had to sign. Can you talk a little bit about the kind of like where she had freedom and where she was limited in what she could do? Because I think sometimes people listen to recording and they imagine that the main person on it has sort of unlimited freedom to do whatever they want, but that's not really the case. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, it's not the case because music is a business. The music industry is part of a large world in which music is a product, to use that word. We can look at Ella's life that way because she handled it and yet she transcended it. So right away, when she was hired by Chick Webb, a brilliant drummer, in 1935, she had a role to fill, which was the novelty singer. He already had a ballad singer, a man. I don't want no girl singer, he said. And he meant he didn't want to put another singer on his payroll. He had men who could sing, and women were not even accepted widely, or they were beginning to be accepted widely as canaries or girls who sang with a band. So she came in with a specific role, and over time she enlarged it. She moved from being a girl swing singer to someone who could take over a whole song from beginning to end, not just 1 minute in a 3-minute recording. So that was the first stage, how to change the role of a swing song singer into a powerful, important role within the band. And that quality lasted throughout her life. She learned how to swing a band on her own. She could push a band. He pushed a band, and she could push a band and be pushed by them too into very dynamic swing. Then when she on bebop, this was absolutely an extraordinary development for her. Her agent knew she had a fan base that did not include avant-garde music. Let me back up a little bit, because in terms of people who helped her decide what to sing, we have to mention Milt Gabler at Decca. Decca was a new label that emerged in the mid-1930s. It became one of the most, if not the most powerful purveyor of 78 RPM records, popular and jazz and country. It was very eclectic. And when she signed with them, she was supposed to be Chick Webb's singer, and slowly they began to recognize she had something on her own. But her big transformation with Decca came when Milt Gabler, a very famous A&R man, artistic and art and repertoire director at the label, took over her contract, which is around 1945. He paired her with other singers and other acts on the Decca label, always Black choices. She really could not choose who she wanted to sing with. So, getting back at your questions, the record label decides mostly what your repertoire is going to be. In her case, she confounded that because she put her own songs in. The record company decides who you will sing with. It's also on the label. She had a lot of trouble with that. She could not really record with Frank Sinatra, for example, because contract and competition prevented that. She could not and did not record with any other female singers either, because it was presumed her big appeal was fronting a band or fronting a small group. I mean, we could go on. She had to do records when she lost her Verve contract that really did not please her, and that included some releases of country music and even some hard rock. It wasn't that the songs themselves were so problematic, it's that the nature of the arrangements could not be controlled by her all of the time. And even the production values, especially in rock, were foreign to her, and she had to adapt. She had to adapt as much as assert her originality. There were constraints. And you know what, Kristen? There are constraints for classical performers. They can't go on the road and decide what they're going to play all the time. They have to listen to their manager, and the manager has to listen to the booking agency. This is a multi-tiered operation. Putting somebody on the road, putting somebody on the record, it's not freedom that is dictating. It's the marketplace and collaborative decision making.
Would you say because she didn't always have control over things like who she was singing with or the arrangements or the repertoire, would do you usually people will say that in popular music and in jazz the recording is the kind of the most important musical artifact to decide sort of what is the original, what is the authentic, or whatever. Do you think that's really true for her, or is it her live performances where she had a little bit more control, at least in terms of what she was going to be doing on stage?
Well, I guess I want to mention the power of YouTube and the power of liberated video, if you will, where people can send in tapes they made of recitals that Ella did all over the world. American television, with a few exceptions, was a kind of constrained space. She was always the guest on somebody else's show. Sometimes there were brilliant performances. There's Bell Telephone Hour performances with Duke Ellington that are smashing. There's always exceptions to the general rule. But I was lucky in that so many media changes happened during the writing of this book. I mean, I'm going to go through them because the book The timing of the project really coincided with an explosion of information on the web. Digital sources came in that had very little limited uh, spread before, limited dissemination. Black newspapers that most scholars, Black or white, had little access to were digitized. I could search, and there were 10,000 references. So this newspaper, that's print. In addition, there were all kinds of anthologies released as records went from 78 to 33 p.m. RPM. We had the long playing record change the nature. So Ella's albums became different artifacts from her singles. She was never a big smash as a singles artist, but as on an album, she could make a different statement as she did with the songbook. So we went from one size of 78, 45, 33 RPM, and then to CDs. All of that happened in her lifetime, and she adapted to those new formats. But the big thing that happened for me was video streaming from all around the world, where her television appearances were taped from beginning to end. So we have live performances from Australia, from France, from Great Britain, from Japan, and from Germany. And this one Berlin 1968 program that is absolutely incredible, where Ella is just owning the stage, owning the audience, and running through repertoire. Does that
Black
answer your question, or
newspapers.
is too
Yes,
long?
absolutely. No, that's fine. The Black newspapers sources are just, I can't imagine being able to do research on a Black subject without those databases, because they open up this whole world that
Yes, they do.
is really
Whites didn't know.
only available in the media. So that has been a huge boon to
We
researchers.
should also mention
sure.
other newspapers, because instead of always quoting the New York Times,
Right.
we can quote regional newspapers or significant critics writing in the Chicago Tribune or the San Francisco Chronicle. We're not so limited to an East Coast perspective. And I think that's a big change no matter what you're studying in music history or in American music history. You get a sense of a much larger country than was possible before.
I agree. And also you can see how things circulate around. You can see the same review coming up all over the place of these little papers, and you see what, small town America was getting to read. And
see the importance of AP, the Associated Press and UPI, and the King Media. You see the importance of syndicated columns. Yeah. We know about Walter Winchell, and we know about the writers for the Times now, but we had music critics who served that role. And some of them, like Leonard Feather, were widely syndicated, and he had much more influence than he's allotted in contemporary studies of jazz history, to take one example.
Ella's first hit was A Tisket a Tasket, which I did not realize till reading your book that she wrote. I had no idea she was a composer. So that's one thing. Just talking about her as more as her musical activities were she had many others as well as singing, but also it was a game song and associated with children. And what do you think the impact on her career was long term to have her first big hit be something associated with children?
Well, it was both good and bad, or many shades of gray in between. First of all, she chose that song because she played that game on the streets of Yonkers. It came out of her own experience. It wasn't just a girls' game, although it's a game associated primarily with girls, but it was a street game, something that she played with her friends. So she knew it intimately. And it was a novelty, she loved novelties and hooks of that sort. She also had a built-in audience because everybody knew it. It's a nursery song. We all know Jack and Jill Went Up the Hill. We all know all kinds of nursery rhymes, and they're part of our legacy. So she had a built-in audience. In fact, one that really went outside of America because it was from folklore. You can see that song in England and France and Holland and Denmark. So people knew it. So that was a big gift. Secondly, it allowed her to be playful and innocent and sly, all these things that showed off the particular qualities of her vocal personality at the time. And I don't know if you, I mean, it made her a global hit. There were covers of that song in France and Denmark, and and even Django Reinhardt played it, and other musicians picked up on it. Yet it was a difficult song to sing. Now, the negative is that it's been really sometimes dismissed and trivialized as trash from great scholars like Gunther Schuller on down to Jeff Ward writing for Ken Burns's program. It's been hard for people to take its measure. And I think it wrongly gave her a veneer of pseudo innocence to her entire life that perhaps she had struggled to overcome. Because when you start out with such a hit like that, it's hard for people to take you seriously later on as someone who has something very, very profound to say about your craft. It was eventually replaced as her key theme song by Mac the Knife, which came out in Berlin in 1960. And that too was a bit of a novelty. It allowed her to impersonate, to riff off lyrics, to laugh at herself on stage. And in a way, it picks up that quality of being able to be amused at your own performance, which happens in a Tisket a Tasket. It's really a very difficult song for other grown-ups to sing and be convincing about it.
You mentioned that one of the downsides of that being a big hit was that people sort of saw as a novelty and kind of dismissed it. But there was more to her that dismissal from what you wrote than just that. There was also this idea that she was a commercial singer, and that people that worked with her, like Chick Webb, were going commercial. And why is commercial a bad thing among jazz critics? And why was that sort of why did that follow her throughout her career, this kind of dismissive attitude? Not just because of Tisket a Tasket, but for other reasons as well.
I think because she was pioneering hybridity all the time. She was a pioneer jazz singer. She also emerged as a vocalist in a time when swing and jazz were synonymous, and swing was a highly commercial music. So I think because of her initial roots in swing, which is a profound element of jazz, it was easy to dismiss her as commercial. The issue of why all of us, music historians in classical music, dismiss too much success as a failure is a large issue. After all, I grew up with music history books that really didn't want to talk about Rachmaninoff very much, or romantic music, or even Tchaikovsky. We were supposed to concentrate on modernism and styles that push things forward in the eyes of music historians. There's always been this struggle between populism and purity, and keeping boundaries straight, no matter what kind of art form you're studying, especially a performative art like music. So it runs through the entire field, and we can't just single out jazz critics for this fault or flaw. I hope so I think that's part of it. And the other thing is she was a girl. And how long can she stay a girl? A girl has to become a serious woman. And Ella had mannerisms on stage that were so natural to her. She giggled, she impersonated, she moved around the stage. Sometimes they could be off-putting to jazz critics who wanted a different version of femininity than they were getting on stage with Ella Fitzgerald. She wasn't selling her sexuality in any way that they could see. She was actually and deliberately cultivating sensual vocality, sensuous music. But because she didn't express it in conventional feminine ways, I think that was also held against her.
Um,
By some critics, we have to distinguish between the critics and the public, but I'm not making that distinction. It was made during her lifetime. The brilliant and influential Martin Williams, who assembled the Smithsonian uh, album of classic jazz, he actually wrote that in his notes about Ella. She is disdained in some quarters by critics. I thought that was a clue to me that I wasn't just projecting my own values on her life. Here was such an influential music historian and critic saying just that. And then I could feel that I had some additional security in my interpretation.
Well, I think so often, um, the sort of, her music is approachable and really brings you in. And as you said, that can really turn off critics who are looking for something different that she wasn't giving them. But it made her beloved by
Made
many
her beloved.
listeners. Yeah, yeah.
Do you know that phrase that Mozart's father told him about Kenner und Liebhaber, amateurs and connoisseurs? You know, the people who know, and the connoisseur, that, and he told his son to write for both.
Right, right. Well, one of the things that you talk about in her music as being important, sort of in jazz and in pop, and also for her career, is her series of songbook recordings. The first one was a Cole Porter songbook, and then she did a series of them focusing on different composers. Why do you think those songbook recordings are so important?
They established a canon of standards that jazz singers still swear by today. I she First of all, it was a turning point in her career that Norman Granz, her brilliant, astute manager, engineered for her. He knew that she could handle a large perspective on these songwriters, and he gave her the room to do it. It wasn't just one LP, it was two LPs, then four LPs, then with Gershwin, I think 5 or 6 LPs. It got bigger and bigger because the project was so very important. She was giving credibility to these songwriters who were associated primarily with Broadway and Hollywood as singular artists who could stand on their own. That's one thing. The second thing is she didn't deliver the songs as if she were a popular singer putting her personality on everything. It would really have been, I think, a mistake to take every single Cole Porter song and treat it as Frank Sinatra might have with his brilliant "I've Got You Under My Skin," or even take every single song and make it an arrangement like he did with Nelson Riddle. It needed some distance, and she could provide that. And the third thing is the clarity of both the music and the words. Today, jazz singers will tell you when they go back to learn that repertoire, they go to Ella first and foremost. Quincy Jones said that in the 1960s. Do you want to give a good commencement present to your favorite student? Give her the songbooks or give him the songbooks. They are an education. So even early on in her lifetime, someone like Quincy Jones and later the ASCAP people themselves, they recognized the canonic influence that these songbooks had and still have today.
Do you think that's a big part of her legacy, or the main part of her legacy is those songbook recordings? I mean, where would you put that in terms of looking over her
I think
career?
it's a starting point for people to want to explore both the before and after. I'm a big fan of the influence that soul had on Ella Fitzgerald, which really is not an explored topic very much. You can even hear it start in the songbooks in Gershwin, or the way she handles summertime. I think that the songs are a starting point also because she sang these songs throughout her lifetime, particularly the Ellington songs. She's the most profound interpreter of Ellington's songs after his own inner circle of vocalists. So it's the key to understanding a great legacy of American music, but it's also a starting point for almost anybody to enter into the before and after part of Ella. I think the after part, the after the songbooks, is an understudied part of Ella's life. I could really do only so much, for example, with her great profound collaborations with Joe Pass, the guitarist whom Norman Granz gave a brilliant career through his label Pablo. They're masterpieces of duets, as the earlier collaborations with Louis Armstrong were. So I think probably as more attention gets paid to the history of vocal jazz as a whole, people will go look at the videos of those collaborations and marvel at the wisdom that comes through.
Well, you mentioned these important collaborations she had with some of the great, other great musicians in jazz. And do you see one, you already mentioned Joe Pass and Ellington. Do you see those as being, I guess, where do you see those in her career, but also like, what do you see as her really important collaborations that made a huge difference to her career, but also into the career of the collaborators she was working with? And those, I guess I'm wondering, like, how did she
Yes.
influence others through those collaborations as well? Because so often I think they are looked at as like, here's Louis Armstrong, the great Louis Armstrong doing his thing, and here's a collaboration with Ella Fitzgerald. But these were equal collaborations. They were working together, and it wasn't one, they were influencing each other and working together in that way.
Yes, they are equal collaborators. I mean, the first that everybody I think agrees is the most important is the collaborations she and Louis Armstrong did. We should say when he started, well, he started with Decca in 1946. Milt Gabler put them together, and right away the black press said, "Oh, wow, this is really something." The jazz press recognized it too, but not like the black press did, who said this is the start of an important alliance. And here I'm thinking of Alice Key, who knew a singer dancer who knew Ella, and said just that imprint. Uh, with Armstrong, she influenced him because the next collaborations they had were with Verve and Norman Granz. And Armstrong at that point was doing mostly pop songs and did not get standards chosen for his repertoire. In fact, you could make the case that Black singers in general came late to the standards. They certainly weren't singing them on Broadway, which was very segregated, or Hollywood, equally segregated, except for Armstrong sometimes. He was in film singing some of the Cole Porter material. But in general, there's a reason Hollywood and I mean Broadway was the great white way, and Hollywood was very discriminatory. So when Ella and Louis did their first collaborations, Louis had not recorded many standards at the time. So what a huge influence that repertoire that she knew inside and out, and he certainly knew as well, was on him and on his career. He didn't go back and do many standards after that, but he certainly made his own standards. But that is a good example of her influence on him, apart from the profound nature of their musical friendship. Now, with Ellington, it's harder to say because he was primarily in the 60s known as an instrumental composer with his great band among jazz aficionados. They didn't take his songs that seriously, but his songs is what kept him alive, at least commercially, in many cases, because they were his entry into pop as well. So she had a role that could bring him an audience that might not even listen to Duke Ellington. And that was the songbook choice she made as number two. And people were shocked. What does he have to do with Broadway? Of course, Ellington used to say, "I am a man of the theater." And he provided that showmanship brilliantly all of the time. But you can see how much he adored the way she did his repertoire. So I think that she brought a dignity to a genre that he did not necessarily claim first place in his own mind.
Um,
I could talk about Basie because she and Basie swung right through the early 70s all around Europe together. But we don't have to, we made the point. You made the point.